Hello, 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 hello. So give me a shout out if you all can hear me and see me on the screen here. Welcome back to another ZClassroom Live here on Twitch, on ZBrush Live. So today we are focusing on some more trial stuff and bringing in some kind of low-level basic stuff. So if you're new to ZBrush, you can download the trial of 2020, and then we're going to go through and create two simple objects inside of ZBrush using starter projects inside Lightbox that you can then 3D print and then test, that kind of stuff. So I see we got some bunch of people in the chat here. So web etching, we won't really be going into, here's a question, need to know which 3D printer is good and safe. So safe is a relative term. If you're not sticking your hands in there while it's going to be pretty safe. In terms of printers that I tend to use, I have one that I run just PLA on, which is a pretty decent plastic. Just smells kind of sweet when it is in use, and that's an old MakerBot replicator too, and I've had that one forever. Then I also have a Form 2 from Form Labs. And then I've also used in the past the Ultimaker machines as well. So for the those are pretty much the three machines that I end up using. So if you want really good detail and quality stuff, definitely check out the Form Labs machines. And then for any of the FDM stuff, there's a lot of ones out there that have a low price point right now. So the Creativity, I can't remember the name of the printer, but you can get one of those for like $200 to $400. And basically all the FDM ones are basically just a hot glue gun, basically, that's just extruding plastic. So as long as it has good stepper motors, you should be able to end up processing any kind of 3D printing. So Ramon, I have this weird kind of growth on my face. I don't know how it came. It's probably just fiber mesh. Eventually, I need to get a haircut too. You can see it's getting like crazy long through here. I could end up doing a Zoltan Ibrahimovic hairstyle ponytail in a little bit here. So web etching is asking about health-wise. So definitely, it's just the material is what the thing is. ABS is pretty toxic in terms of health-wise, so you want to vent that out, print it outside. But PLA, there's some people that are allergic to it, and so it could drive them nuts. But in general, anything that's heating plastic is letting out some sort of fumes, so you can definitely just vent all that stuff out. Let's see what else we got here question-wise. I got one comment that lead smells sweet too when you melt it, so that's definitely true. Yep, and Art and Times saying that the resin machines are getting cheaper and cheaper too. Exactly. For material for safe for making kitchen stuff, that's going to be something that's food grade type stuff. I've never done anything that, sure, there is a material you can use. I know ABS, I think, is a lot of the stuff that you'll use in kitchenware, but ABS is toxic to use when it's making the device. The only thing with PLA too, before we get into stuff here, is PLA will melt in the sun. So that's the cheapest material you can get, and you can print a lot of stuff, but if you print like a nice helmet and then you paint it outside, and then you leave it outside, and then the sun hits it, it ends up warping it, and then there's lots of tears. Let's see what else here. Oh man, lots of stuff. All right, so today we're gonna hit on some low-level stuff, and we're gonna do some of the basics first, and then we're gonna get into two projects and just do some simple sculpting, walk you through the basics on that. We'll talk about size and scale, and then exporting a file out. I meant to install preform on this, so we'll see if my preform is still going. If it is, we'll send the model over there and you can see it loaded in there. So preform is the Form Labs software. So once again, we have the trial of 2020 is available. So if you have anyone that is looking for something to do during this pandemic, definitely download the trial and try it for free for 30 days. There's full featured, unrestricted. So you can, try it out, and then you can tune into any of these live streams, kind of follow along, mess with the software, and see if it's something you like doing. With this, ZBrush runs on CPU, not GPU. So if you have a machine that's even decently old, say like an old I've got it actually running on a Core 2 Duo. So that's as like the oldest technology I currently have that still actively works. And ZBrush still runs on a Core 2 Duo. So if you have a CPU in your machine, it doesn't care about the graphics card, and more than likely you can get it to run. So for anyone that's just looking for stuff, but they may not have like the fancy machine or an updated machine, download the trial and just try it out, and more than likely it's still going to launch on that old hardware. Also, in addition to this, there's a few ways you can get into ZBrush. So we have monthly subscriptions and also perpetual licenses for the professional version, which is what I'm going to be demoing with today. And this will get you down to as low as $40 a month for a monthly subscription. And then the perpetual license, we've never charged for upgrades. So if you've bought ZBrush once, you've gotten all the upgrades, all the new bells and whistles for free. In addition to this, we also have ZBrush Core, which is our light version of ZBrush, and Daisuke and Solomon Blair, who also do some streaming on our channel here, they will be doing demos with ZBrush Core, and so you can see the feature sets in there. Now, ZBrush Core is our lighter version of ZBrush, so it doesn't have everything the professional version has, but it can also get you down to a cheaper price point on a monthly subscription, so you're down to $10 a month for ZBrush Core monthly. And then there is a perpetual license for ZBrush Core as well, and there is a upgrade path which will allow you to upgrade from ZBrush Core to the full version. All right, so today what we're going to be making here is we're going to be doing a little mug here. So we'll try to make it a little bit cleaner in this one here. And then we're also going to sculpt a little pendant, so a little keychain. So these are going to be the two main ones here. And so if you don't have access to a 3D printer too, there's also a bunch of sites online where you can send files to and they'll print things out. So for this mug here, you could actually get it printed out in ceramic. So get it actually done in clay, and then they'll fire it and you can actually get the mug back, which is pretty cool. So all sorts of avenues, and then 3D printers are getting more and more accessible all over the place, and definitely it's one of those things that it's getting cheaper as well. So let's see here. Let me look at these questions quick. All right, so to start off, if you first launch up ZBrush, this is what you're going to be greeted with. So at the top here we have Lightbox, and Lightbox is, kind of think of it as the bridge inside of Photoshop. So it's ZBrush's browser, internal browser. And with this, it allows you to see previews of ZPR and ZTL files. So you can kind of see what's in a file before you open it. So in here, we have a bunch of different, starting files you can start from. So usually, if you've watched any of the other streams before this, I usually start with this Dynamesh Sphere 128 ZPR. And the thing here, to load anything, you just double click and it'll launch that file in there, and then you just go right into sculpting. For today, we're going to go over here to the 3D printing folder. So if you don't have Lightbox open, just come up here and click the Lightbox button or press comma on your keyboard. And then we're going to locate the 3D printing folder and open this up. And in here you have some preset files that are already set up to size and scale. And so in here we have some keychains and various designs. So we have circles, we have hearts, we have a square, and then we have a star. We also have some 3D miniature scenes that are set up too. So these are set up in terms of doing little miniature type characters. So you can actually start with one of these, sculpt the model, and it's going to retain the form it was in originally, and then you can send that out and get it printed. And then we're also going to hit on these mugs too. So we have a mug without a handle and then a mug with the handle. And then additionally to these files for 3D printing, if you go back to project here, we also have some Wacom files here that are set to scale too. And these will allow you to kind of 3D print your own pen holders if you want to. So you can start with one of these files. They're set up to size. So all you have to do is open this up, sculpt on it, and then you can export it out. It's going to be to scale. And then when you run to print it, it should come out, and then your little Wacom pen is going to fit right in there. We're going to do the mugs and the keychains today. So in the project area, and then in the 3D printing folder, we're going to locate the mug with handle 3D printing ZPR, and we're just going to double click this, and this is now going to load this in. Now inside of ZBrush, after you have a model loaded, you can just get right into sculpting. So this is a ZPR file, which is a project file. So we double clicked on that in Lightbox, it opened up, and now if we come in here, we can just click and drag, and this will allow us to sculpt. Now, Positive carving on a model is just clicking and dragging. To perform a negative carve, hold down the Alt key and click and drag, and that will cut into the surface. And then, let me get my keyboard out over here. We've got a little lighter keyboard version. So let me just do this one quick that I got the keyboard back. So click and drag, positive stroke, Alt click and drag will carve in, and then Shift and drag will smooth. And that's your main functionality here for sculpting inside of ZBrush. Now for navigation, you can click off in a blank spot of your canvas and rotate around your mesh. Then you can also hold down Alt and click and drag, which will pan. And then to zoom in and zoom out, you just need to hold down Alt and click, release Alt, and then drag, and that'll perform that zoom in, zoom out. Now additionally, if you're new to ZBrush, there's also these icons over here, and one will allow you to move, one will allow you to zoom, and one will allow you to rotate. So you can use these little icons here to position and move your model on screen rather than using those other ones. And I've went into more of that kind of basic navigation stuff in the first ZClassroom Live on sculpting a bust. So if you want to, another recap on those and go into a little more depth, you can go there. A few things, other things I want to hit on before we get into sculpting on this mesh here. If you come up here and use any of these zoom, actual, or AA half buttons, this is going to perform a digital zoom basically on your model. So it's like zooming into a 2D image inside of Photoshop. And if you accidentally click this to zoom in, you're going to see it's going to get pixelated. And so as you sculpt on this, now you're going to get all this kind of pixelation. This is because you're zoomed into the screen in 2D. So to reset this back, just come over here and click the actual button, and that will return you back to here. And then the last thing that people often run into is if you're used to saving files inside other applications, you may click Shift plus S on your keyboard. But if you do that inside of ZBrush, you're going to get a snapshot, which is going to take the 3D model you have and it's going to drop it down into basically 2.5D. So you can see here's my 3D cup, and then I have this other one kind of floating in the middle here. So oftentimes as a new user, you'll run into this and then you won't understand kind of what's going on here or how to get rid of this. So if you have this happen where you have floating geo and then locked geo on your screen, just hit Control plus N, and that will clear that out and then get you back to 3D. So that's called snapshot. So Shift S will give you a snapshot of your model. And if you hit that by accident, Control plus N will clear that out. Let's look at these questions here, and then we'll get into some sculpting stuff. So Mashin's saying, I saw this page and I couldn't find the trial. So let's go back here real quick. So if you just go to pixologic.com/ZBrush/trial, it should take you here. And then if you click on this try ZBrush now, this should now open up this little screen here. You'll need to register an account quickly, and then that should give you download links for downloading the trial. There's also a try Keyshot bridge down here as well, which will allow you to try the bridge, which will allow you to take models from ZBrush to Keyshot as well. So just using this try ZBrush 2020 button there. Yes, Charlie, we do need a haircut. Pandemic haircuts. I'm not cutting it myself though, because that would just be a disaster. You just come in and be crazy. So Dougie was asking, I didn't specify which button I was using to navigate on the canvas, so we'll just do that real quick. So click and drag off the model will rotate, Alt click and drag will pan, and then the really complicated one is Alt, hold down Alt, click off the canvas, release Alt, and then drag, and now allow you to zoom. So that one's a little tough. So it's Alt, so it's click, Alt, release, Alt, drag. So Alt, click, release, drag. That was a little tough one, but you can also just come over here and do that. Make it a little bit easier. All right, let me look through these questions here. Thank you, Dougie, for linking the trial. I appreciate it. All right. So for my mug here, I'm just going to create a simple design. And today we're going to just do some processes. We're going to come and create the little design. We're going to make this little kind of creature mug. So I'm going to give it a face on the front and then maybe some arms coming down on the side here. So very, very simplistic sculpting. But if you're new to ZBrush, this is an easy way to just start messing with the application, generating something, and then also it's already set the size. And so you can export it out and mess with the 3D printing aspect too. So the first thing inside of ZBrush is I'm going to switch my brush. So the standard brush is what will be loaded in by default, and this will give you this nice kind of smooth fall off through here. This one I don't tend to use too much because it's just a little bit too soft, and so I like to switch my brush to the clay buildup brush. If you make a stroke inside of ZBrush or mess up anything while you're working on a model, you can always hit Control Z, which will undo, and then Control Shift Z will redo. So those are little hotkeys there to undo and redo processes you've done on your mesh. Now to activate the brush palette, you just need to hit B on your keyboard or come up here and click, and this will display a series of brushes that ship inside of ZBrush. And so you can see there's a bunch in here that are loaded by default. Now most of the times if I'm sculpting something, I switch between maybe 5 brushes. So I'll use the standard brush, clay buildup, dam standard, snake hook, move, and then H polish. So those are usually my go-tos for sculpting inside of ZBrush. For today, we're going to start with the clay buildup brush. So if I come up here to the top, you'll see there is clay buildup brush already in this quick pick area up here. If you want to access any brush through a hotkey system inside of ZBrush, the hotkey works on a 3-letter combination. So if you hit B on your keyboard, that's going to open the brush palette. Then the next letter you type on your keyboard is going to isolate by the brush name. So if I hit B first and then I hit C, this is now going to isolate by the letter C, which is going to show me all the brushes that begin with C. Now after you hit that second letter, you're now going to get these little letters on all the brushes. So if I look across clay buildup, you'll see the third letter here would be B. So B, C, B would automatically select the clay buildup brush through a hotkey. So if I come over here and click B, C, B, I'm now going to have clay buildup selected. Now if I want to go back to the standard brush, I'd hit B on my keyboard, I'd isolate by the letter S, and then if we see the standard brush right here, its hotkey is T. So BST is standard. So once you get a few of these kind of button brush combinations down, they're just going to stick in your head, and then you can switch brushes really quick. If you want to do it manually, you can always just come up here, click this, and then click on the brush you want, and then that's going to allow you to select it too. But clay buildup, BCB, standard brush, BST, and then if we want to like jump into, say, the dam standard brush, which is a good carving brush, BDS is that one, and then the move brush would be BMV. So all sorts of little hotkeys there, and once you start using it, you'll start using those hotkeys rather than coming up here and open them up and selecting a brush. All right, so back to clay buildup. Now with clay buildup, we have our mug here, and one thing important to notice when you're sculpting on meshes inside of ZBrush, that if you have thin objects, kind of like this mug here, and I start sculpting on the surface here, let's hold Alt and sculpt into this, you'll see that it's going to start distorting the back face as well. So by default, brushes inside of ZBrush are going to sculpt on one side of the mesh, and then if you have a really thin kind of topology on a model, like say like this mug here, it oftentimes will go all the way through and then also sculpt on the back side. So for my mug, I don't really want this to happen. I want to sculpt on the front, but I don't want that back facing to be affected, okay? So there are some ways you can deal with this. So the first way is there's a auto masking feature that lives inside of ZBrush to allow you to mask out the back faces. So if I come over here to the brush palette and open this up, and I move keyboard over here, and I come down to the auto masking area, brush auto masking. In here there is a back face mask. And so if I activate this by just clicking and turning it on, and now I come across my mug and sculpt, you're going to see it's not going to affect that inside. Now the back face masking will work on just standard brushes. So if you're just sculpting with standard geometry, it's going to work fine. So you can just enable this on your brush, and then you don't have to worry about it going through the other side. Now, however, backface masking will not work with processes like Sculptris Pro. So Sculptris Pro is a process inside of ZBrush which will allow you to add tessellation as you sculpt on your model. This mesh right here is not really set up for Sculptris Pro because first, if we go to the tool palette and open the geometry area here, you can see it has subdivisions, which Sculptris Pro will not work with. And then I also have backface masking enabled on this brush, which Sculptris Pro won't work with. So the other method in which you could protect the inner portion of this mug, if you want to use Sculptris Pro or on your mesh, is you can hide the inner portion of this mug and then mask it, and then that will protect that area. So if I come over here and activate polyframes, and then I'm just going to turn off line here, there's these things called polygroups that live inside of ZBrush. They're basically like selection sets. And what this allows you to do is you can isolate by these different parts. You can use them to, hide or show certain areas, protect areas. There's little ways you can just kind of break up your model easily. So with this mug, it's set into these two polygroups. So I have this inner area and this outer area. So what I can do is I can mask this inner portion, so then when I sculpt out here, it doesn't affect that inner part. So I'm gonna hold down Control and Shift, and this is gonna give me the select rectangle brush. And with this, if I come across an area on my mesh that has a different polygroup, like this center here, and I click, it's going to first isolate that part. So now I just have that inner cavity of the mug. If I hold Control and Shift and click again, it's gonna show me the outside. And so you can kind of use this to your advantage to hide and show parts of your model based on this grouping. So I want to hold Control and Shift and click the inner part here to isolate this inner area. Then I want to apply a mask to this surface to protect it. So to apply a mask, I can hold down the Control key, and this is going to give me the mask brush. And if I just hold down Control and click and drag, I can mask manually by just painting on the surface, and then this is going to protect any area that is masked from my sculptural marks. Or I can hold Control and drag, and this is going to give me this square that I can now frame a part with, and then when I release on that, it's now going to mask that entire area. So now I have this inner portion masked, and then if I bring back my entire model by holding Control and Shift to get the select rectangle brush, and then clicking off on a blank spot on my canvas, I now have the mug, and then that inner portion is masked. So now if I say go to the brush palette, disable back face masking, and now sculpt on my model, you'll see it's going to be protected on that inner side. So that is another way you can protect parts of your mesh, so when you sculpt on something, it doesn't affect the inner side. And then if just to kind of see the difference here, so that's with the masking, and then if I clear my mask by holding Control and dragging off, and now sculpt again, you'll see it's going to affect that inside. So masking that inner portion is another way, and then that will allow you to use Sculptris Pro and sculpt on your mesh. One other thing with this, so with this mesh here, say we want to start sculpting on it and say we mess up something, right? And then we want to revert it back to the way it is. So what we can do is we can store the vertex positions of this mesh, and then we can make this into what is called a morph target. And then this will be remembered, and then we can use a brush that will allow us to morph back to the state. So I'm going to set that up as well, just in case I start doing some craziness down here on the bottom, and then I want to clean it up. So first I'm going to come into the tool palettes. I'm going to just delete my lower subdivisions here. I don't really need them for this mesh. And then I'm going to scroll down here to the morph target area. Let me find it. Where are you, morph target? And in here I want to click store morph target. And so what this is going to allow me to do, it's going to allow me to almost do this process where I can sculpt and then I can erase. So if I come through and say sculpt on my mesh, let me turn on that back face masking again. So I sculpt something like this, right? So give them some sort of weird hands through here. And now I decide, hey, I don't like this, right? So now I can go to the brush palette and open this up. In here I can select the Morph Brush. So I'm gonna hit B to open up the brush palette, hit M to isolate by the letter M, and then you'll see the Morph Brush has the letter O. So BMO would give me the Morph Brush. And now with the Morph Brush, if I come across the surface here, what it's going to do is as I use this brush, it's going to look at that target that I stored. And this is going to allow me to perform almost like an erase function. So if I come in and start doing this, you see it's going to erase basically the sculptural assets that I did, and it's going to return it back to the original position of my mesh. So this is really handy, especially with something like this, where I may have came in and then I've made a mess and I want to go back in and say refine or harden an edge. I can use this, and this will allow me to clean up those edges around the mesh there. And now I can get back to where I was. So another little handy process there, using the Morph Brush to clean. And so you can always smooth this out, and then I come back in with that Morph Target. And you can see I can get a really nice kind of refined edge to an area. So the Morph Brush is nice to use. All right, oh my gosh, look at all these questions today. You guys are gonna keep me busy through this entire thing. So Rio's asking, confusions about printing. What size, file, or poly count is the best? What's the best to do? Decimate, Dynamesh, ZRemesh, or a combination? Is the STL a best choice for jewelry? So in terms of printing stuff out after we get this done, if the model is a high polygon count, right now this is pretty low. We're at 77,000 points. So I could send this model directly to a printer, it's gonna be fine. Now if I just start dividing this model up to add more detail, it may reach a plateau in which the printer or the slicing software can't handle. And so that would be when you would come through and you'd want to take that mesh and use a process like Decimation Master, which comes through and looks at the sculptural details and then reduces the entire topology of your model. And then after it's reduced, you can then export that out and then have it printed. In terms of file format, STL, OBJ, it really doesn't matter. It's just sending out the same information. So it's just sending out 3D mesh data. So it just depends on what file format the slicer and the printer can handle. So if the printer and slicer can only handle an STL, just export an STL. If it can handle an OBJ, an STL, an FBX, you know, all sorts of other different file formats, you can export out any of those and then use that in the software. So it just depends on what the requirements are for the printer. MC Bobble's asking how to create an outline of a shape. Is there an easy way to do that, like a heart? So you can do some processes with the ZBrush to get that. You could also use some of the spotlight functionality. So if you take a spotlight, that is basically just a heart silhouette, and you can load that into Spotlight. You can apply a border effect to that and then generate geometry from that. I'd say recommend you go check out the ZClassroom Live for using Spotlight. I did one a few weeks ago, and that will go through that process of using Spotlight, importing an alpha that's basically a heart shape, and then you can take that and modify it and turn it into geometry. So it'll probably end up getting you what you're looking for there, McBobbles. Let's see what else here. So Fabio is asking about color map IDs for Substance Painter. So I'm not going to be covering that today, but the basic principle is that you can use polygrouping like this. And then in the texture map area here, you can create from, let's see, where's it at? Create from UV map. And I believe if you create from UV map and you have the polyframes turned on, it should generate the polygrouping from that. And then you can use that as an ID pass in another application. But I'm not going to be covering that today. Yes, so Dr. Depresso, convert your polygroups to polypaint and then bake the texture map. Polypaint from polygroups, right there. Thank you, Dr. Depresso. There you go, boom. Jojo is asking, how can I insert an object which will follow the curve of a mesh? So you probably want to use an IMM curve brush for that. And so any brush you have that has parts, so say like you take the, like the IMM model kit brush. We're just going to do this quick. We're going on tangents. Let me quick save this. And then you come up here to stroke and you go to curve and you activate curve mode. It'll take any of these, and then if you drag on your model, it'll follow that curve. So that's how you can take an object and have it following the curve of just what you've drawn out. You can also frame this curve to polygroups. So if I undid this and then went at the stroke palette here in the curve function area, there's this frame mesh option. So you know how I have these, talked about these two polygroups on this mug. If I type in, if I click frame mesh, you'll see it's going to give me a curve where those polygroups are split. And then I can take that and click and it's going to generate it right there. So that would be a way, if you had topology, you could then frame the topology with the curve and then use the curve in an IMM part and it will follow that curve. So quick tangent there for you, Jojo. So the keyboard here is a, it's no board is what I'm using here. And I had it where it was extended out and had the number keys on the end, but it was just taking up too much real estate. And then I was like, oh yeah, I use those all the time, and I never used them. So this will just show you as I click and do things inside of ZBrush what I'm pressing. So if I press B on my keyboard, you'll see it's going to highlight the letter B. If I press Alt, you guys are going to see it highlight Alt, Control, and Shift. So just if you're following along and I end up doing a lot of crazy hotkeys, and I'm not describing the hotkeys, you can kind of see the visual aspect of that. I had it bigger, but it takes up a lot of space. Let's see what else we got here. I'm glad you like the Cathedral thing, Pro 4210. Saeed's asking about spinning around the model. So basically, you can frame the mesh into view. So right now, if I kind of rotate, it's going to rotate around this, and then depending on where your frame is, it's going to determine how it's going to rotate. So clicking the frame a few times may allow you to kind of rotate a little bit better. But it's going to be based on the bounding box of your object when you click frame. So this has a handle here. So as I spin around, it's not going to be, exactly centered. It's spinning around the, bounding box dimensions. So you'd have to, select a model that is in the middle of the world, and then when you rotate, it would rotate around. David Lee's asking, can we make a brush other than IMM and VDM? So you can create just normal brushes, which are the ones that would just have, like say the clay build-up brush is just basically a basic brush. So you can have an alpha created to it, so you can create those. And then the VDM brushes or the chisel brushes will be these here. Then you also have IMM brushes, which are the ones that just allow you to insert a part. And then you have IMM curve brushes, which will allow you to insert a part across a curve. And then you also have things like extractor brushes, which are set up to use the extractor functionality. You have the Z-modeler brush, which is this whole other category. Topology brushes, transpose brushes. So there's a lot of different brushes. So basically, if you can load it, you can change the settings and then make a new brush out of it. So all of them are pretty much customizable. If you want to see what the base type of a brush is too, if you hover over it, you see this one says base type clay. And then if I go to say the standard brush, this one should be base type standard. And then if you say select, chisel brush, this is going to be base type single layer. So there are different types of brushes. So you just need to figure out, what kind of brush you want to start from, and then modify the changes, modify the settings, which are all going to be basically in this brush palette over here. And then you also have settings that will live in the stroke area. And after you have those set, you can just go to brush and save as, and you can create a new brush from that. Web Etching is asking, to make the model ready for 3D printing, what precautions are needed? So basically it just depends on, actually there's a lot of things. It's going to be a lot of trial and error. If it's your first time printing, it's definitely going to be a bit of a learning curve possibly. Number one thing is overhangs. It depends on what your printer is. So like for this mug here, if I print it on an FDM machine, what's going to happen is if I can print it directly like this, and then this all needs to be supported, right? So it would end up generating geometry through here that can then break out. Certain applications now for slicers, there's a one called Simplify 3D that does a really good job for its supports. And with this model here, it would generate supports which will allow it to be printed. Because basically if, here I'll go in tangent mode. This is also a high thing here. So if you want to see kind of like a slicer view of your model, what I did here was I just created a box primitive, and then I've just appended it to my scene. I then went up here and activated Move, Scale, or Rotate, which gave me the Gizmo 3D. Then up here I turned on Live Boolean, and now over here I'm going to activate Subtractive on the subtool and then turn off my polyframes. So this is how the printer is going to print your part, okay? And this is a good way to kind of see your model, what it's going to look like as it would be printing. So as you can see here, as I start making this mesh, you can see these areas where it's going to start growing, right? And so it's going to get to a part, this is not too bad, but basically you need to have supports in order to get stuff printed. So as I print this one out, this angle of the handle here, as it starts doing this, isn't really supported. So if you print something like this, this has ability where there's nothing underneath it, so it's going to do this. It's going to droop, right? So you can add supports, which are going to add these things there, but then you got to peel those supports off and clean them up, and that enters a whole nother thing of where if it's on a place of your model that's really prominent, you're now going to possibly have all these support points that are generated there, and you're going to have to do a lot of cleanup to get that out. So you often will rotate a model in a specific way. So when you print it, you're trying to get all these kind of underhangs in a certain angle. And so this will kind of show you how this would end up printing out. And you see this one would be pretty decent. It'd probably fail here as well, just because there's some of these parts here that are giving overhangs and you don't really have enough supporting material, and then that would go up. So that's a good way to kind of look at how a model would be printing. And that's just using the live Boolean, and I've just attached a box to the mesh here. So overhangs are a big thing, also watertight meshes as well. So if you have a model that is full of holes, you're not gonna be able to print it. Also thin surfaces, so if you have something that's too thin, you're not gonna be able to print it. And that all depends, the thickness of what can be printed depends and varies per printer. So if you have, say the Formlabs machine can get pretty fine stuff. So you'll be able to get a wall that's pretty thin. But then some of the FDM ones, you're not gonna be able to get a thin wall because the filament is thicker than normal. And then also, it depends on how the material will bend too, so it could cause fluctuations like this, and then when you print, you're not gonna have enough stability. There's a whole bunch of stuff. But after you do it, after a while, you start to know what you can do and what you can't do. And then when you start making things, you can kind of look out for those before you start printing them. Let's see here. Yeah, and for the web etching is asking, so any tips on making it so the model will stand properly. So that you can kind of use visually, just look at the quality of the mesh and how much material it has. You can weigh a model based on hollowing different areas. So if you have a model that's hollowed, and then you could add more mass to a part, which will balance it out. But a lot of it can be done for just making things stand just by looking at it. So if you just look at it, I don't know, maybe I've did animation mess for too long and can kind of see where weight stuff is. But basically, you can kind of tell when you look at a mesh if it's going to be able to stand or not stand. Just looking at it from the side, you can see where the weight is shifting and kind of falling. You can kind of fix it by using having parts that are hollow and parts that are solid, but that's a whole nother thing. There are some stuff that people have made, the algorithms they'll run on a mesh and then kind of get it so it always stands. But in general, just eyeballing it usually ends up working for me. But I don't know how to exactly, I'm not going to explain it very well on what the premise there is. It's just forcing the weight through just like poses. I don't know, just that animation pose stuff has always kind of clicked, and it worked. Can I make a model by giving out dimensions like we use in Fusion 360? So David's asking that. So you can scale your model in your scene, and you can start with that. And also if you import a model from say Fusion 360, it's gonna hold that scale. So you could quickly block something out in Fusion 360, shoot it in a ZBrush, it's gonna retain that scale, and then you can sculpt, do whatever you want to it, and then that scale is gonna be retained, and you can just print like that. So another thing there. If your model has holes in it, you can close them out. Dynamesh will try to close your holes too. It just depends on what the mesh is. If your mesh has a lot of holes, you're gonna need to fill those and seal them up. You can also check your subtool analyzation right here. So if you go to transform, analyze selected subtool, this is first gonna ask you, hey, what size your mesh it has here. So you just kind of wanna select the one that your mesh is. So this one is a mug, so we're gonna use inches, which is 3. So it's going to be 3.3 by 3.9 by 4.7 inches, which is your standard kind of mug size here. And then after you click that, it's going to tell me if the model is watertight or not, what the volume is. So this is going to be your resin or material cost right through here. So this one just as is going to cost me 235 milliliters of resin. So you probably wouldn't want to print this on a Formlabs machine. That's a lot of resin. And then the surface area is 92 inches there. So there is a little way you can kind of analyze your subtool before printing it too. And this is the word soup today. This is handy if you're doing 3D printing. So you can go through and kind of check your stuff out. And then if you find out it's gonna be too expensive, you can scale it down. You can inflate it, will change the kind of amount of material it's gonna use. You can then hollow it out. All sorts of different things you can do to get that weight down. Kat Adair is asking if we can unlock the Gizmo and have it find the center of the model. So with the Gizmo here, you can temporarily unlock it by holding down Alt, and this will allow you to move it so you can reposition it. So if I want to position down here, I'm just holding Alt and then moving it. If I want to move it over here, I can hold Alt and move it like this. You can also hold Alt and click, and this will allow you to snap the Gizmo to an area on your mesh. So if I want to snap it to the bottom, hold Alt and click, and it's going to snap it there. And then there is also this go to unmasked mesh center icon right here, which will allow you to take the gizmo and put it back to the center of your mesh. So this one is, looking at the bounding box, right? So it's looking at this entire area, so it's centering to that. If I want to center it to this middle part, maybe the middle of the mug, what I can do is I can isolate first this middle area here, and then I'm going to click it again to bring everything back, and I'm going to mask everything, and then just have this middle part unmasked. And so what this is going to do, when I use the Gizmo 3D, you'll notice that this thing says go to unmasked mesh center. So this should now look at that unmasked part, which should be cylindrical there, and should now put the Gizmo 3D directly in the middle there. There is also a button that's associated with this go to unmasked mesh center, and that lives in the tool palette. And then down here in the masking area, there is go to unmask center, which is right here. So you can hotkey this. So if your gizmo goes off screen, you can click this, and that's going to go and do that same thing that clicking this little button here is going to do. Now, after you have this centered here, you may want to reset the gizmo too. So right now I have it positioned in the middle of the mug. However, it's not in the world axis, right? So it's kind of, pointing in a different direction. Oh, make sure I have symmetry off. So what I can do is I can unlock this, and then I can click reset orientation, which is going to reset it to the world, and then I can lock it again. And now I should be able to perform this rotation, and it should do it at the center of that mug. So the little go to unmask mesh center, and then I unlocked it, and then I reset the mesh orientation. So let me know, Kat, if that helps you on that. There you go. Kat was actually answering my question. So, let's see here. Zelram's asking, can you talk about hollowing your models for SLA printing, error check, and post-process? So hollowing, basically your best bet for that is you can use booleans and hollow the inner out. You can also use the automated process using Dynamesh. I'll run through that in the demo today. I need to sculpt something on this quick. So let me get through these questions quick, and then we'll get back to sculpting here. Jojo's asking, how can I get the dimensions of the print? So if I want to find out what this is, so we could use that transform analyze, and then we could also use scale master is the other way. And in here, I can come and do sliders to subtool size, and this is going to give me the dimensions there. I can switch to inches, and it will give me the inch dimension, centimeters, and it's going to do it based on the selected subtool. So it's going to give you the whole option through here. You can also use the transpose line to kind of measure. So if you get into move, scale, or rotate, and then turn off the Gizmo 3D by pressing Y, this will give you the transpose line, and this will allow you to draw this out, and then you can kind of get a unit value on that. Now, if you set your scene scale in Scale Master based on a dimension, so if I click this and I say I want it to be in inches, now you'll see that the transpose line should be returning an inch value at the top here. So you can see that now the height from the bottom to the top is 3.9 inches there, and then if I come and do this, I can get the dimensions of, say, this part, just 4.7. If I want to find the interior dimensions of that handle, you can see 2.2. So that will allow you to kind of measure certain things in there. But there isn't really like this kind of measurement system for the transpose line is all kind of arbitrary. So you can set values to the transpose line and it'll return whatever you want. So I'd recommend using the Z plugin thing here, set your scene scale, and then use the transpose line and measure from there. All right, let's see what else we got here. Kat is also bringing up, yes, you can also extract with a negative number to create a shell. Thank you, Kat. So Deadly Marshmallow's asking, can you measure the thickness and then adjust it? So you'd have to, if you want the thing to be thicker globally, there's no real way to do it based on a percentage value. So if I want this mug to be thicker, I'd go to deformation and use the inflate option here, and this would thicken it up, and then I'd have to recheck the measurements. on the process there. But there isn't anything that's going to allow you to go, hey, make this thicker by 3 millimeters. Let's see what else. Man, you guys got questions all over the place. Tigarity's asking, can I get meshes to snap to the middle of the y-axis? So in the macro tab here up at the top, there are some options down here for zeroing stuff out. There's also a snap to ground. So if you want it to go to the floor, so by default, floor options inside of ZBrush are going to snap to the bottom of your model. So if you move your model up, like this mug here, if I take it and I move it up, and then rotate, you see that floor is always going to snap to the bottom. So it's giving you this kind of false sense of the floor. So if you wanted to snap to the true size here, you want to click this snap to ground, and that will now position your model in the true ground part here will be at that 0, 0 in the Y. So you can do that. I do need an assistant today. You get so many questions. Well, Dante's asking about the detachable parts, so you want to set up keys to do that, basically to detach things. That's a whole nother thing there. The scale brush would be, so one question here asking, is there a scale brush? Nerb is asking, so you have the Gizmo 3D, which is your basic scale manipulator. It's universal, so you can scale like this. The scale values for your mesh live in the geometry tab or the size, and they're going to be right here. Now the size of your mesh in real world kind of units is going to be based on the geometry size, XYZ size here, multiplied by the export scale, and that's going to give your dimensions. So there's two kind of things here that's determining the size of this mesh. So it's taking my XYZ size, multiplying it by this, and then it's giving me a unit value that basically is related to millimeters. So if you want to find or rescale a mesh, you could also use this side option here. But the best way I'd say to do this rescaling of stuff would just be using the Scale Master plugin. So if I want to change the size of this, I can first make sure I have my sliders to a size. I can then say, let's change this to, let's say 4 inches by 4 by 5. I can now just click Resize Subtool, and that's going to reprocess that. And now that is going to do that size and also export value for me automatically. And then if I go up here and do sliders to subtool size, I've now changed the size of that mesh. So that's how I'd recommend resizing something, just using Scale Master, typing in your values, and going that way. Carly's asking about the live boolean stuff I did with joints, so I will not be going through that today. This is going to be a very basic 3D printing one, but you guys have a lot of questions. Favorite ZBrush artist? There's so many. I look at a lot of stuff for inspiration, and there's just a ton. I really like Pablo's stuff, and he's also a very good instructor for ZBrush too. Kimet is asking, how can I change the mirror from left to right if I mistakenly sculpt on the other side of the model? So let's say, we'll do this quick. I'm gonna turn off symmetry and say I sculpted on this side of the mesh and I wanted to be over there. And so if I came up and did say a mirror and weld, it would go from the other side and remove that part I had. So what you want to do for that is go to the deformation tab, and there's a mirror option right here. So you just want to mirror the mesh so the sculpting you did do is on the other side. You can also do this with masking as well. So you can also mirror with that. And then after that's done, after you've mirrored it to the side that's correct, now you can click mirror and weld and it'll go back to the other side. So just use the mirror option to flip what you don't want. You can also project stuff too. So if you had something, and say you were sculpted on this part of the model, but you have all this other stuff that you were sculpting on, and you just accidentally did one side, you can always duplicate your tool, mirror it, and then project from the other side over. Too many YouTube viewers. All right, let's see. Sprues. Sprues are for like 3D, it's like model kits. When you have Gundam models are all broken up. They have these things called sprues that are connecting things. That's so they can get printed out or cast in one thing. And so you just can fuse everything together so all those little small pits won't go all over the place, and then you can cut those off and get your parts that way. Web etching is asking about printing large stuff. So the best thing for that is using, say, the live Boolean system. So let's say this mug is massive, right? But my printer only handles, let's make this will be my printer's bounding box, right? So this is as big as I can print on my printer, right? So what I do is I'd use the live Boolean system, and I'd first, activate this, and this would be one part of my model here. And then the other part, I just use that same thing as basically I import in a box, set it to my printer volume, and then I can move it around my mesh. And I can use the subtractive option in the Boolean to hide parts, and this is gonna leave me one part. And I can also use the intersection, which will give me the other one. So now I know that this part's gonna fit 100% in the printer volume, and so that could be part one, and then part two could be this. So if I just needed to split it in two, I'm just taking a box and then changing intersection versus subtractive, and this will now give me those two parts, and then I can generate the live Boolean between those two parts, and I'll have my two shapes, and they should line up, and I can send one to print and then send the other print and then glue them together and get through there. I have a whole kind of thing that I should probably do. It seems like you guys have a lot of questions on that. Just do a stream on that whole process. I think Solomon did some for his Mandalorian helmet, so you may want to check out his stream on the 3D printing stuff. But I have a bunch of kind of processes using Boolean where I'll go through and cut it up like that. And it's basically, you can take a mesh and add cut lines in different forms just with subtraction processes, and then flip that process to get the other side. So that gives you a clean kind of seam line between the two. Saeed, you can use the masked area won't mirror, the unmasked will. And you can also project too if it does not go there. Okay, so let's go back to my mug. We're gonna reload it here, and we're just gonna sculpt something here quick. So I'm gonna use the clay buildup brush. I've got my subtool. I'm gonna delete my lower subdivisions here. And I've turned symmetry on. This can be done by going to the transform area up here, and you can activate symmetry or press X on your keyboard. So for this, I want to sculpt a little kind of creature here. So I'm just using clay buildup. I have this inner portion unprotected, so I want to go and make sure that with clay buildup, I have auto masking and backface turned on. And now just to simply sculpt, it's very easy, right? So you just come in and just start playing with the shapes of your mesh here. So I'm going to make some weird mug thing here, and all I'm doing is just clicking and dragging to sculpt, and then I'm holding Alt to remove parts. So moving in and out, and this is basically my sculpting process. And then I'll come back in and smooth different things. And then before I want to do any of this, since I reset my scene, let's store a Morph Target. So let's get out of here. I'm going to Control Z all the way back to my original mug, make sure my geometry is deleted, and then go down here to Morph Target and store Morph Target. And now let's do that sculpting again. So we're gonna do, it almost looks kind of like a weird Angry Bird character. And this is part of the kind of fun process in terms of ZBrush. Definitely if this is your first time kind of using it, just kind of go loose. Like don't worry too much about following things exactly. And just play with the forms. And you're gonna be able to tell if it's if it looks right or not. And don't be afraid to experiment. And then for his weird arms, I like doing these kind of like swoopy things. So his face might be too big, but we can go back and fix that here. So side note too, I broke my my laptop screen on Monday night, and so I currently have it closed And then I have this Frankenstein set up with this Dell monitor over here that I'm taking your guys' questions on. And it is from probably, I want to say maybe 2005. Its max resolution is like 640. And something in here is not getting enough airflow because I have like this weird kind of burning smell happening somewhere. So I keep like smelling like it's something on fire. I don't see anything on fire, but it's not good right now. So if you guys see anything come up in flames, that's what's happening there. All right, so all I'm doing is sculpting this, and once again, just playing with the forms. Since I have that back face mask on, you can see none of that interior surface is getting destroyed. And I can always come back in and clean this up too, so I'm not liking this kind of structure through here. So I'm just gonna clear it out. And so all I did was just cut it away, hold down Alt, and then come back in and modify this a little bit here. So you're not like really constrained to a certain style or a certain aspect. You can always erase too, or not erase, just undo it. And keeping in mind as I'm doing this too, the kind of style or form here that I'm kind of going for, I want to make sure that it's clunky or blocky enough to be printed in terms of a mug. So remember, this would be going to kind of ceramic form, so you don't want to do like really tiny details, because anything that has like really tiny details is just going to be lost. For a lot of the kind of clay processes they use for 3D printing, the clay extruders themselves are have these really wide nozzles. So you think they're just taking clay, and instead of using say a hot glue gun tip, they're just taking the clay and they're just extruding that instead into these loops. They can also do burnouts where you can print the model and then they'll make a mold and then they'll burn out the interior and then fill it with slip. So that's like liquid clay, and then they'll cast like that too. But for most times, a lot of ones are usually just using extruders now. Now for this stage here, this mesh is using no Sculptris Pro. So as you can see, as I'm sculpting on the mesh, it's totally only using the topology that already exists. So it's not adding topology as I sculpt. So sometimes when you're doing this, you would want to add the topology, which would give you a cleaner result. So you could turn on Sculptris Pro. With that, I wouldn't be able to use this Morph Target functionality that I want to kick in. So with that, I probably wouldn't want to use Sculptris Pro until the very end if I'm going to do it on something like this. Now I could also duplicate this mug and have a secondary version of it that I could use as a base. And so this is one thing I could do. So let's say with this here, let's quick save this. I'm going to duplicate it. So I have this version and this version here. Now I have a Morph Target on this one. So what I can do is I can go to Solo, and I can use the Morph option. Let me find it here. Where are you? And this will morph back to that original mug, right? So this is what that Morph Target's going to do. It's going to take those stored points and then return back. You can also get some happy accidents if you morph the other way. So there's all sorts of fun things you can do with Morph Targets. And so let's say I have this, and now I have my other one on. And so basically I have an original mug and then I have a mug before it. And what you can do is you can duplicate your tool and then sculpt on one, and you can see this one's going to kind of expand out of your original mug. However, now you can use this to your advantage where you can kind of carve in to the surface there and see what it would look like with the mug behind it. So this is another way you can kind of model or sculpt inside of ZBrush. And this works really good for like cloth stuff too. So if you're ever doing, say, clothing for a character, it's really handy because you can, or scribe lines or different details, because basically you're just taking the one surface and you're pushing in the other. And then if I, say, turn my coloring on, ooh, got some red wax there. You guys get a bonus material, how to clear materials. Bonus tangent. If you ever want to clear materials on a subtool, first select the flat color, then make sure M is turned on, and then go color, fill object. Select the next subtool, color, fill object, and then go back to a normal material there. Some people like that red wax. Not me, not me. And so now you can see I kind of have this kind of result. And then I could use the Boolean system to come through and merge this together. So another little option there. And that's basically what the Morph Target is doing with this mesh too. So if I come back with this one without that other one, and now select the Morph Brush, you can see I can morph that surface back. This will also allow you to fix, say if you forgot backface masking, you can always morph back too. So now I can clean up that areas of that mug that maybe I didn't want to have all that craziness going on. So something like that. And then you can always smooth out your things as well. So one little trick there using morph targets. Now the morph target's only going to be based on your initial subdivision you had your mesh on before you applied the morph. So for this one here, if I wanted more detail on this, what I would need to do is I'd need to come through and say divide the mesh up to get that more detail, and then subdivide it, or then actually apply the morph target. Because right now if I go and divide this, the morph target's not going to work anymore. So just one little thing there. But we're making this mesh here to kind of fit kind of that clay aspect, since it'll be a mug, kind of a porcelain type structure. This one's looking a little bit crazy. All right, we're going to check questions here. I need to get a little question thing that's on my screen floating so I don't have to look away. All right, let's see here. The cups, always a cup. It could be crazy. Let's see here. Model isn't watertight, bunch of things. Dr. Presso, okay, yeah, he's answering a question. Thank you for that. For creating molds for 3D printing, you could basically you could use the live Boolean system and use it as a negative process. So quickly, say for this mug, this is not going to be a full demonstration of this, but say I pen this cube and I move it up to the top, and then I can position it, say halfway, and scale it, put it right here. I'll make it a little bit wider. Now I can set that as a positive, make sure I have live Boolean turned on, and then for my mug, I'm going to set it as subtractive, and now you're going to see that this would never work, but this is a way you can kind of get that mold aspect kind of played out. So you can just use your geometry and then run a primitive around it, and then as you scrub through it, you're going to be able to see that mold kind of process. So this will allow you to, generate a mold on your mesh. Of course, this mesh has a lot of different parts that would not print correctly, so you'd have to make some pretty advanced mold structures for this. But that's one way you can kind of do it, is just using the Boolean system, generating your mold shape and then subtracting your form from it, and then you can check it out that way. Amir's asking, is the way to save masks out using layers? So the only really way to save out a mask is if you convert the mask to an alpha and then export that alpha out. So your mesh would have to have UVs first, then you can go to the masking area, and in here there is a, where's it at? Let me find it here. In Tool Texture Map, new for masking, and this would take the masking and generate a texture map from it. You can then save that texture map out, and then you can load that texture map back in, and then as long as UVs haven't changed on that mesh, you can now click Mask by Alpha. It's going to take the masking from that alpha map and then load it back on your model. So that's really the only way to save masks out. You could also do it by color if you just paint something, and then you could do a mask by color, which would find the mask there. Another question, is there a way to use mask lasso and not mask the back face? So no. So the lasso is always going to shoot through. So with this mesh here, if I hold down Control and Shift and select the Select Lasso brush, or not the Select Lasso brush, hold down Control and click Select Mask Lasso. If I apply a mask like that, it's going to go all the way through. So if I only want to affect part of the mesh, you're basically going to have to hide the part you don't want affected. So if I hide that part there and now use the mask lasso, you see now it's not going to be affected. So visibility is going to be the only way you're going to be able to get the lasso to work on only part of your mesh. So if I go here and I say hide half this thing here and then now use the lasso and then bring everything back, see it's only going to affect half. So lasso is always going to shoot through, so you're going to have to use visibility to isolate parts you don't want the lasso on and then use it like that. One question about, does ZBrush have something like a building and infill simulation? So no, there is no infill simulations. Rue, yes, you could use the history recall feature. Core Gazer, I'm just making a mess right now. So basically, I just wanted to sculpt something really quick on this mug just so you guys can get a feel for it and then export it out. So very simplistic stuff here. The initial ones I had ended up looking something more like this. They kind of do look like little Angry Bird characters there. So that was all the plan was for this here. So just there's been a lot of tangent questions. Still looking at these questions here. If you use Alt with the Morph Target, it's going to kind of do the reverse of the Morph Target there. So it's not really going to give you what you want. Positive Morph Target is going to be your best. So if I come through and do that. Oh, let me make sure this is turned off. So it'll do the opposites. This is the Alt Morph. So it's not really going to get you what you're looking for. It will do it will work. So that's Morph Target normally is going to give me this, or it's going to morph back to the original. If I hold Alt, it's going to kind of expend out on any of the areas that is different from the Morph Target. So now he's got like some weird lumpy eye. So you can use it, but it's it'll give you a result, but it's not going to do anything fancy with it. Zone out for the Morph Target stuff. When you add a subdivision, the Morph Target is no longer going to match. So what this means is with my Morph Target, it's currently set for this polygon count. So it's looking at my model, it's looking at these 77,000 points, and it's storing all the positions of those. So when I click that, it was taking my initial mug shape and saying, hey, this point is here, this point is here, this point is here. Now if I divide the mesh up, I'm changing the topology, right? So then that is going to disable the morph. So you want to make sure that if you know you're going to need so much detail on a mesh, divide it up first, then store the morph target, and then you can go that way. Layers will also give you a similar thing. Layers are basically giving you multiple morph targets, so you can also do that process as well. I see Kat is a fan of the red wax, the material of the gods. Question here from the White Leaf. Is it best to go into a sculpt anticipating it will be 3D printed or retrofit an existing sculpt? So if you know what the end goal of the mesh is, it's always better to kind of tailor to that function. So in some of the past streams I've done, it's just been like the car one we did last Friday, I guess it was. I did a car, and all I knew what that car was, it was going to end up in a render. Like I wasn't going to print it and do anything else. So my geometry on it was a mess. I had triangles all over the place. The thing wasn't watertight. It was just a complete mess. That thing can never be 3D printed unless I went in and spent a lot of time cleaning it up. So if you know your end goal for something, sculpt towards that. So for this mug here, it's already starting out as a watertight mesh. I'm sculpting on it, not damaging the watertight nature of it, not putting holes in it. So this is ready to be printed. So if you want something to be printed, it's best to go in knowing you're gonna have stuff printed and then make everything so they're solid. So if you're doing a character, instead of just doing single polygons of stuff for say straps, model the straps with thickness, embed them into the mesh a little bit. It's just making sure you plan out that stuff out. Because if you just make, say, a game character and try to convert it to 3D printing, it's gonna take almost the same amount of time to fix that model to be 3D printed as it would to just created that model from scratch most times. So just try to figure out which one, what your goal is, and then model according. Saeed, so the mirroring will never mirror the masked part. It's always going to mirror the unmasked. Imperial, yeah, if you have the question, just answer it about your filament printer. I don't know if I can help you, but I will see. Just throw the question out. There's a bunch in here. I'm trying to get through them. Yes, Dougie, I am Ringo. You can send me your Beatles album. I will put some Scrabble on it. It may not bring you any money, but I can try. Thank you, Ro, for the answer there. Saeed, your question on how can I enable edit mode after using the circle dot in first. You're gonna have to explain that a little bit more. You can, yes, zone out, so you can definitely delete the morph target and then add a new morph target, which will allow you to do that. The thing here with this mug, so my original morph target is this, right? So if I say delete this and now divide up, so now I have more topology. However, now if I store this morph target again, you're gonna see that if I come in and use that morph brush, it's not gonna take me back to my original cylinder, because when I stored it, this is what my mesh looked like. So if I sculpt it on now, I'll be able to morph back to what I had when I stored the morph target. So I can get back to this, but I won't be able to get back to the cup because that isn't currently my morph target. There's some tricks you can do with projection, so we'll go ahead and do that real quick. So let's say I've got this, and this one has that working morph, right? So here I'll show you the projection way. So this is handy. Pretty much if you do anything inside a ZBrush, you mess something up and you have a version of it, say in a past file, a past save, you can pretty much always project back. You can, if you have it somewhere, you can project that detail back to your mesh. So let's say with this mug here, I'm gonna say I've got my normal mug here and my mug with the handle. So I want to divide this mesh up basically and then get this detail, but then allow me to sculpt more quality into it. So I'm gonna go to this mug here that just has no creature on it. I'm gonna divide this up, and I'm gonna divide it up to say 1.2 million, okay? And then now I'm gonna take this and I'm going to turn on the eyeball icon for my original mug and then turn on the one for this. And what I wanna do is I wanna use a projection. And so I'm gonna go to project here. And in here, I want to project the details from the mug like this to this one here. So before I do the projection, I want to store a morph target on this new one. So I'm going to store that there. I'm going to close some of these out. And now I want to project to this mesh these details. So from this to this. Now I stored a morph target on the one I'm projecting to. So what this is going to allow me to do, if the projection goes crazy and it ends up putting stuff all over the place, I can use that morph target and scrub those errors out or those anomalies out. So with the mug here, I'm going to make sure they're both on. I have polypaint turned on so I can project that as well. I'm going to come down to the tool, subtool, project area here. I always change my distance to 0.1. So I usually switch this to 0.1. And then in here, I'm just going to click project all. Now, depending on how many points you're projecting from, so if you have a really high mesh and you're going to something really high, it could take a while to project. This one should be pretty quick. It's going to run through this projection here. All right, so that projected. So you can see here, this is my result. Now it almost got everything, right? So I got all my details. This is now my high resolutions. This one's now the 1.2. It's projected the details back from my original, and I still have that morph target. So this area went through here, went a little crazy. And this is because the range of that projection and the distance was a little bit out of it, so it didn't project that part. So if I want to project that part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the clay buildup brush. I'm going to smooth out this quickly through here and then bring this out. So I'm just pushing these polygons outward. And then I'm going to apply a mask. Let's get out of that mask lasso. I'm going to mask this area here, and I'm going to invert the mask by holding Control and clicking off the canvas. And now I'm going to redo my projection. Now this will go faster if you have masked areas. And so what I did was the projection failed because my distance wasn't correct. Now I could have used this projection shell option here to try to shell the cage out and then project from that part in, which would have probably solved it. I can also, as I just did here, was I just inflated that geometry. So I just pulled that out. I then have now masked everything but that area, and now I can reproject, and that's now going to project that area back and fix it. Okay, so that's one way you can kind of go through and fix projection issues. So now I have this high resolution mug that has more detail now, so I can sculpt more definition. And I also now have a morph target that will allow me to get back, if I can hit the right hotkeys here, get back to that original mug. So that was an extreme tangent. I don't know how, I may have lost everybody on that one. But basically what I did was I took my default mug, I divided it up because I didn't divide it up enough initially. And so I divided a new mug up. I then stored a morph target on that. I then projected the details from the one I sculpted on to the high resolution mug. And then now I've gone back in and I now have that morph target ability so I can come in and scrub details out if need be. So hopefully that helps. Imperial Fist has an image. This better not be a bad image. This better be a good image. This is always those, you never know. So from your image here, this looks like it could just be the print artifacts, just the printer itself. This could be when it hit this line here for the FDM print, it could have got a draft and then that layer didn't adhere as well. And so you got the artifact there. It could also be with your gantry, could be a little bit off when it gets to that area. It could have had, maybe the nozzle had a little bit too much filament on it when it came across there. It's more gonna be on a hardware side in terms of the print quality in that level rather than the print. So now if you look at your 3D model and it has this stuff in these areas, then yeah, it would be on the 3D model side. But this to me initially looks like it's gonna be the printer itself that's generating these artifacts. And this is just part of dealing with the 3D printer. So if it's exposed to air, if the filament has an air bubble in it, like there's a lot of things that can go through and just cause one of the lines to be a little bit weird. But that's gonna be all on hardware filament side, not really the digital file. And thank you for not sending a dirty image. Use the circle dots. All right, so Saeed, I'm still not sure what circle dots you are talking about to enable edit mode. I'm not really clear on that. What I ask you to do is if you want to, I can look into it more. If you come up here to the top of the help menu, there's a Pixologic support button right here. You can click that and they'll take you to the support website. You can fill out a ticket and just put my name in there somewhere and they'll usually send it to me. And then I can look at it. You can send me an example and then we can try to diagnose it that way. Checking these questions here. Dougie's asking, sometimes ZBrush will give you a message. ZBrush is removing some undue steps to preserve memories. You should be able to hit escape on that or save before. Yeah, send a ticket on that one, Doug. So Zone Out is asking, how long have you been ZBrushing and how long does it take to fit in your head? So this is pretty much all my head is filled with. There's nothing else. It's either this or I'm asleep. That's the two things. So I've been using ZBrush for, man, I don't know, since, I'd have to think of it's well over 15 years. So it's been a while. And just using it is all it is, basically, in terms to get knowledge. So the more you use it, the more familiar you're going to become with anything. So. Jimmy Ann is asking, is there a way to make a brush that randomly changes alphas when stamping? So what you can do in the brush, if you have a brush that's set up with insert mesh variations, so this could be a 3D alpha, you can set on this multi-mesh select here, and as you use it, it will scrub through the different items that are stored in that brush. And so now inside of ZBrush there are like multi-alpha brushes which you can make, which is basically taking like a 3D alpha and then storing it. And so I'd say try that, go to brush, it should work. And then in here it should highlight up through here, and there's a multi-mesh select, and you can set the multi-mesh selector in your variations, and then as you draw out it should cycle through those parts there. But you want to make sure you have a brush with 3D alphas loaded, so that would be something like the chisel brushes. They have kind of like these vector displacement meshes that will come in, and they're basically like a 3D alpha of that. So that would be how you go by doing that. Jojo already has his version of his mug. He's making it faster. So unseen blade, the best thing for checking kind of your thickness stuff on a mesh would be, say, if you take a primitive like this box here, and I'm going to have my mug and turn off solo here. Let me get out of my Morph Target brush. Is you can take a cube, and then in here you can turn on live boolean, and with this you can set the cube to subtractive, and if you move this it's going to come through your model and give you this kind of display. So it's going to come through and give you almost a slicing type process. So I'm just taking a cube, I have it set to subtractive, and as I run it across my model, the live boolean is previewing what's happening here. And then after you have that, you can then switch to move, scale, or rotate, turn off the Gizmo 3D, and then you can kind of use the transpose line to come through and see your dimensions on, say, those wall thicknesses. So that would be the kind of the best bet to do that. To come through and just see that stuff. The other way you can find just some various information on your mesh would be go to the transform area here and do analyze selected subtool, and that'll let you know the if the mesh is watertight and things like that. So if you have holes or something, it would return that value to you. But that would be the way, really the only way to kind of check your thickness. In general, if you have thickness on a model, most printer softwares will check it for you, so you can just export it out. And if you run it into preform, it's going to be like, hey, this is too thin here. And so then you can come back and make the changes too. So web etching is asking what kind of paint can be used. Any types of paint. Basically, my only recommendations for paint, if you printed something out, if you want to take it through the full stages where you paint it, you clear coat it, and then you polish it and do all that stuff, use the same brand of paint. That is my one main recommendation. So if you are going to paint something, try to go all the way through with the same brand. So use the same primer, use the same paint, and use the same clear coat as the company, because they basically, so if you go to like say Duplicolor, like use their primer, use their paint, use their clear coat. They're set up to work together. So you're not going to end up with some paint or some primer that doesn't match together, because that would be the, if you have something like that that happens, that's when you start getting bubbles, the paint's not sticking to each other, and then you have this whole mesh and you have to spend a lot of time sanding stuff down. So my one recommendation for painting anything that's been 3D printed is stay in the same family of primer, paint, and clear coat, top coat, whatever you want to call it. And yes, for a lot of time for 3D printers, if you're depending on the quality of the machine, you will have to use some filler on it. So I use heavy car paint fillers, something that has a really high filler rate, and they'll fill in a lot of holes. The other thing that works really awesome for PLA materials is using a wood filler. That works pretty well. So that'll come through, and you can just take some wood filler and just put it over the top of your model, let it dry, and then you can easily sand that off too. There are some resin fillers you can get too, like Bondo. Also, there's some XTC is one that will actually give you like this kind of thing you can paint on your models. They work pretty well, but the problem is with anything that's too viscous or too liquidy, what's going to happen is gravity's going to take it and it's going to put it in places maybe you don't want it. And so it's not going to give you the most exact result that you want. And yes, Kat brings up, definitely make sure that you have, your paint isn't going to eat your material. If you ever taken styrofoam and tried to paint it with spray paint, oftentimes that styrofoam gets eaten up. All right. Yeah, and toys for children, like oftentimes just make sure they don't eat it. The PLA stuff is usually generally after it's printed, you can wash it off and do things like that. You can also just look online for what manufacturers actually use in their paints too. You can find those things too. Yeah, and the paint that T-Garrity is saying the Tamiya, their stuff's awesome too. It's really awesome. Their primer is excellent for fine details. That's one of my go-to primers for Formlab prints. Saeed, yes, you can insert a model with radial symmetry and then modify the one you inserted, yes. And Rue brings up a point that you can also use nano mesh too. All right, so let's quickly get something here and then we're gonna switch to our pendant just so you guys can kind of get some of these processes. So this guy's not really gonna get finished here. I got on too many tangents here, but basically I'd come through and just start sculpting things out. I'd switch to the damn standard brush, so BDS, and then I also flip my processes there. So this guy turned into something very weird here. But just play with the sculpture. It doesn't take much to make a mug, even with tangents and me not spending too much time on this. You all should be able to make something far superior than what I got going on here. To smooth things out, one thing you can also use is there is a option in the geometry palette in clay polish. They'll allow you to clay polish your model too. This is another one that helps, especially if you've done some noisy sculpting like this. I can run clay polish and this will go through and polish my surface. Now, once this polish happens, it's going to apply a mask. So if you want to run it multiple times, hold Control and clear your mask, and then polish again, and then clear it and polish again. And this will allow you to get some of those striations out of there and just clean up your surface of your mesh really quick. Another go-to brush is the H-Polish brush that I use a lot. This allows you to get nice flat surfaces. So you can go in and hit these areas and kind of flatten stuff out. This is turning into a complete mess. It needs more love. It could look better if I continued on this, but I want to open up the pendant file too. So he's gone into some weird tiki thing there. And then say you're happy with this mug, which I'm clearly am not. I don't think I can save it in time. I don't think it can work. Oh. Let's see if I can get. All right, there you go. That's what you guys are getting. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. Take it all in. All right, so now that I'm ready for, say, to print this, right? Okay, so first let's check to make sure it's watertight. Transform palette, analyze subtool. I want to print it at this inch size here. So we're gonna double check that. It's saying it is watertight. All right, so let's say it isn't watertight. So let's make a hole in this really quick. So I'm just gonna come up through and we're gonna cut off part of this handle here. And then we're gonna delete that hidden points. Let's delete my subdivisions here. All right, so now let's say I run the analyze selection, I do this, not watertight. All right, so we need to solve the water tightness before we can print. And so the easiest thing to do with this is we just can go to the tool area, go to geometry, go to modify topology, and do a close holes. Now, 90% of the time, this is gonna resolve your issues. So if you hit close holes, you're gonna see it's gonna fill it in there. If you go back up and it's still saying it's not watertight, the next process you can do is you can go to the Geometry tab and then go to Mesh Integrity. And in here, there's a check mesh and a fix mesh. So if you've gone through and you've made some weird geometry and it's like interpenetrating and giving you like this weird kind of Swiss cheese effect, try running this, and this will go through and try to clean your mesh up. So you can check it and return, oh, look at all these errors, and then you can click this fix mesh and it'll possibly fix it for you. If that works, you can then probably need to go back to modify topology, close those holes, and then run that print again. And if it says watertight, you're good to go. If it's still giving you issues, now there's two other processes you can do to try to clean up your mesh. The first thing you can do is just turn it into a Dynamesh. So this is gonna take your model and resurface the entire thing. If your mesh has some really bad Swiss cheesing happening, or some areas that are like generating some T vertices or non-coplanar surfaces, Dynamesh should clean that up. If you just run it, it'll reprocess your entire model and give you that solution. Now you may need to do that projection process we did from this high-res version to your Dynamesh one to get some of your details back, especially if your mesh is really, really messy. The other thing you can try is coming up here and activating Move, Scale, or Rotate. Make sure you have the Gizmo 3D active. Then go to this Customize gear here. And in here, run Remesh by Union. So this is going to take your model and try to process it with the Boolean system. If you have your holes closed, it should work. If you do not have a watertight mesh, then it's not going to work probably. It's going to give you an error. But that's another way you can kind of take a model and clean it up before you send it out to printing. But this one should be pretty good. I didn't do anything that's destroying anything. It's returning as watertight. I fixed those holes by doing this close hole process there. Now, this mesh is a little bit heavy, so he's 1.2. Now, most 3D printer software can handle up to like 1 million to 1 million polygons, so it's usually not, as technology increases, you're able to send larger meshes to printers. If you have an older printer, you may need to dumb this down a little bit, or if your machine can't handle it, if it enters into the slicing software. So some slicing software still won't be able to work at millions and millions of polygons, which is what ZBrush loves, but slicing software not so much. So to get this lower, what I can do is I come to the Z plugin tab here. I can then locate the Decimation Master plugin. And what Decimation Master is going to do, it's going to analyze the sculptural surfaces on my model. It's then going to reduce the topology, but keep the sculptural detail. And if you're printing anything on a printer, it's going to look and work fine. Okay, so with this, here I have my 1.2 million polygon mesh. I usually end up, if I'm sending something to print, especially if it's multiple parts, I usually just take it down to 250K. And so there's a little button here, you can just automate this process. You can click on this, it's going to run through the analyzing, and it's going to decimate it down to this number. So I'm going to click this on my mesh here, and it's going to go through and analyze this. So for questions here, Comics Legend likes them. I don't know. You may be the only one, Comics Legend, that likes this weird little mug I've made. Kat's talking about SLA. So yes, if you have a hole in your surface, the SLA material, which is usually a resin or a goo, will get trapped. It will also heat up and cause air bubbles, which could explode your model. So definitely making holes for that is a good thing, and you can use the live Boolean for that as well. All right, so with this, here is the decimated version, and I'm just going to undo this so you can see the before. So this is my before, and this is my after. And so you can see the amount of points in which this model has been reduced. So it went from 1.2 to 250. And if I turn off my polyframes, you can see this is before and this is after. This is before and this is after. No change, right? So I just reduced that model a whole bunch of geometry. And as you can see, all my beautiful sculpting here didn't really need all those polygons, right? So I just reduced this model down. So now this model is down, I can check the size. So we can go to the Z plugin tab here. We can go to Scale Master. In here I can change the size of it or just double verify that it's what I want it to be. So we're at these dimensions. If I want to modify these, I can modify them. After this, now we can just export this out. Now if I want to export this out, the main thing here is that the STL file format and the OBJ file format do not contain any unit values. So it does not tell you, if you open that file, if that scene is in inches, if it's in millimeters, if it's in centimeters, if it's in feet. All it tells you is values. So it's just going to return number values and no unit information. So this is key when you export stuff out. So right now, this model is set to 3.9, 3.94, and 5. So if I export this out just through the tool palette up here, what this is going to do, it's going to look at the tool geometry size value and then the export scale, if I can get down here, and it's going to generate values based on that. So if I come up here and go to export, it's going to assume basically this mug is in millimeters, and it's going to send out the inch conversion to millimeter size in generic units. So it's going to give me millimeter values of what that inch model would be. Now if I take that model, knowing that it's in millimeters, and I import it into an inch solution, it's not going to know that the millimeters, may not know that the millimeters need to get converted to inches. So you're going to end up with a model that is coming in at this crazy size of 50 inches rather than, say, 5 inches. And that's because the file format contains no unit values. So to get around this, in the Scale Master option here, down here at the bottom, you can export in a unit scale. So if I know that I want this mug here is in inches, and I know that the software, the slicer I'm importing into, its native environment is inches, I can come down here and click Export to Unit Scale, and it's going to export these values out in an OBJ file to that scale. So then you can import that into an inches environment. If you come through here and go to export, it's always going to assume it's going to be basically in millimeters. So if I come over here and click sliders as subtool, this is the value that file is going to export out. So if you need to get to a certain value, I'd say use Scale Master down here and use one of these values down here and then export to unit scale. If you just know that you just always want to be in millimeters, you can definitely just use these options here to size things to inches and then send it out as millimeters by just coming up here and clicking export. Most software nowadays will look and see if the number is really tiny. It'll ask you. So if you export it into Preform, Preform's going to go, hey, this part's a little small. Did you mean for it to be in inches? Or hey, this part's pretty big. Did you mean for it to be in millimeters? And so it'll do that conversion on the fly. So a lot of slicers will do that now in general. But for most parts, the size here is set for this mug. And so if I export out here, it's going to export out as millimeters. If I want to force it out as generic unit values in inches, go to Scale Master, select inches, and then export to those units. But you want to make sure that when you export that out, that you know what unit value your environment you're going to is looking for. Because if you're sending out your model in inch format and then it's going into a millimeters environment, it's going to be really tiny. And if you send out your model in millimeter format and it's going to an inch environment, it's going to be really big. So just remember that there. Now let's look at these questions here quick. Oh man, so many questions. Thank you, Kat, for answering a lot of stuff. I appreciate it. Zone out, the check for watertight is in Transform, Analyze Selected Subtool. So Zone's saying, Simplify 3D gives me horrible results on surfaces with printed on supports. So there's some settings, there's some happy settings with Simplify 3D. You just need to kind of work those out. The main thing with the supports for Simplify is that the key factor for me is that they easily come off, right? That's the big thing. If I can spend 2 seconds pulling up the supports on a model and then just fill them in quickly and sand them down, that's a time saver. If I have to go in and I print a model out and I have to spend an hour removing the supports, that's not good. So I do like the Simplify supports structures there, but it does definitely give you where you rip those off, that mesh area isn't going to be perfectly clean and smooth. So it does have that. You will have to do some filling in there with it. But it just depends on where you want to spend your time. You want to spend your time picking off the supports, or do you want to spend your time filling and sanding? So just take your pick on those. Yeah, for the Formlabs printers, Preform, that's the one to go to, and it's excellent. You can analyze all your stuff, check your models out. It'll tell you if stuff's going to have suction, basically, which means that it's going to get trapped and possibly explode or do things like that. So it checks for all that stuff before it goes to the printer. So you can always send a file over there and then check it out and then come back into ZBrush and modify your stuff. Comics Legend is asking, in your opinion, what's the truest way to model perspective on or off and at what focal length? So that just is variable on the artist and the person. So for 3D printing, a lot of stuff, especially if you do any kind of contract work for toys or anything like that, they usually want all your kind of turnarounds in orthographic because then you kind of get a little better view of it. If I'm doing something for 3D printing and I know that it's going to be larger, I'll do test prints. So say if I'm doing a helmet, I can view it in here. I can come up to say, turn perspective on, go to the draw area up here, change my camera angles and get a good kind of view on it. But then before I print anything large or waste a bunch of material saying printing all these parts in PLA, I'll print a miniature one out, something about like 2 to 4 inches, and just have that done in say like 15 minutes to an hour there. And then I'll just take that off and look at it and see if the proportions look right in true in life. And then I'll make changes if I need to, and then I'll go and proceed and print larger. So I definitely check, especially if it's something that I know that I'm going to be using multiple spools of stuff, especially for any cosplay type equipment or armor or things like that. If I know I'm going big, I'll do test prints, and I usually end up doing a lot of test prints. For the Cyberman helmets I did a while ago, I printed, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 test prints of that helmet and made changes and then went back in and adjusted them until I printed the full ones. Philippe's asking, can you drink anything with a 3D printed model like this? Yeah, I don't. So I wouldn't print it in PLA and drink out of it. And I wouldn't print it in ABS and drink out of it. But there are solutions nowadays where you can actually print to there's extruders that will extrude clay. And so you can take the model and 3D print it out with clay, and then you can glaze it and fire it. And then of course you can drink out of that. So there are solutions now in terms of technology where you can 3D print to clay. And so that would be the goal for this mug here. So Web Etching's asking, my model is in inches and printer will print it in millimeters. Will the printer convert it automatically? Most of the times it will ask you when you bring it in. If not, you can change the scale pretty easily in ScaleMaster. All right, so that is the crazy mug here. So I'm gonna hit up the pendant one really quick and just show you guys that too. So once again, all these ones in the project 3D printing folder here are set up to a size already. So you can just come through and say, grab one of these and start modeling and then send it to a printer. So the keychain heart here, I can load this one in. Once again, we talked about the back face masking options. So let's say I wanna start sculpting on this. So I'm gonna select that clay buildup brush, turn on my perspective here, and say I start sculpting something out. Now you wanna make sure as you're doing this that if you did not have the back face masking turned on, you would end up starting sculpting into the back of your model. So just be wary of that when you're doing this. So just make sure you have your brush and then back face masking on, and now you can come in and start sculpting something out of here and just playing with the shapes and stuff and getting a design out of it. Now, if you want to use, say, Sculptris Pro for something like this too, you definitely can use that. So recently, for any of my sculpting kind of stuff, I usually will turn Sculptris on. Just remember that it's not going to work with subdivision surfaces, and it will also not work with that back face masking. So if I wanted to come through and say, use Sculptris Pro here, let me clean up this mess here really quick. I was trying to start an elephant here and it started going crazy. There we go. So let's say I want to use Sculptris Pro for my asset here. So I'm going to turn up my floor here quick. I'm going to come up here and first make sure I don't have any subdivisions. And then I'm going to go to Brush and turn off back face masking. And now I can use Sculptris Pro. Sculptris Pro, when you use this, it will add topology as you sculpt. So it's going to be based on your draw size. So as I sculpt, it's going to add topology. This is really handy for getting clean meshes. However, this could go through the back face of this model. So what I would want to do with this is I'd want to apply some masking to the back. So I'm going to hold down Control and draw a box out like so, and kind of protect that back area through here. This is also a nice way to get this kind of area around your sculpt protected too. And I'll show you another trick too that's fun. And so now I can come through and sculpt this out with Sculptris Pro, and you see that back's going to be protected. Now another thing that's kind of cool is, especially if you're making, say, like pendants like this, or even say patches. So like if you do any sort of like military characters that have these patches on it, and as you're working with stuff, you can kind of break things up into layers. So like if you think about stuff stacked on each other. And one fun thing to do is if you want to flatten a surface out, you can just apply a masking to part of a mesh. So say if I come through and apply it to here. I've now added masking to this area, and I'm just going to come in and add this and this. Now I can invert the mask by holding Control and clicking off. Oops. And now I've got this part isolated. And so what this is going to allow me to do is I can come through and I can scale this part, and I can take those points out and in and scale them together and make it flat. So say I want this whole area to be flat on this design here. I'm going to activate Move, Scale, or Rotate to get the Gizmo 3D. I'm going to click the Go to Unmask Mesh Center and now Scale. And this is now going to flatten that part out. And so now I can use this to my advantage now and kind of generate a different surface too. So that's another little fun thing, random tangent. If you have like an area on your mesh that you want to kind of have this layered or stepped effect, you can just go to the side of it and mask out part of it and then move it and scale it to flatten a surface. So this is what it was. And then I wanted to flatten that entire area, so I just unmasked that middle part and then use that scale option to flatten it out. And so now I've flattened that surface. So that's another way, say if you've come through and distorted this whole area through here and you want to clean this up a little bit, you can come and apply a mask, flip that mask, and now you can use the Gizmo 3D, Move, Scale, and Rotate, and flatten that out. And now you've got a clean transition through there. So another little trick there for that. So Jojo's asking for lettering. So yeah, sure, we can do some lettering real quick. So let's start with a new pendant here. So here's how I'd go through and do some lettering on this. So we have a plugin in the top here that is called the Text 3D and Vector Shapes. And so I can do a new text here, and we'll type in, I guess we'll just stick with the standard ZBrush. This is going to give me a ZBrush text here, and then in here, I probably want some beveling on this. So if you think about this as a keychain, if you want to probably mold it or cast it, you want to make sure nothing's trapped. So right now the sides on this are very clean, and so what I want to do is apply a little bit of beveling on this so that if it needs to get pulled out of a mold, it can make it. We also have a drafting system you can check on this. Inside the transform palette up here, you can turn on this draft angle, and that'll allow you to see the draft of stuff, which is handy. For this, I'm going to turn the beveling on and get a little bevel there. I'm also going to up my resolution so it's a little bit smoother. So there we got that. And then I'm going to extrude this out a little bit more so it's got a little more depth. So there's some quick lettering. And I'm going to take this and use Move, Scale, and Rotate to scale it down. And then I want to apply it in front of my thing here, like that. Now it's sticking off the surface here, so I can still play with the scale of the width here. And if I wanted to be kind of a negative shape, I can stick it in like that, and then come up here and activate Subtractive with Live Boolean on. And boom, we've got ZBrush negative. And then I can move this up to kind of set how much that goes in, right? So that would be how you could do a negative cut into your mesh. And since this is a separate subtool and it's using the Live Boolean, I can reposition this, I can move it around, I can change it. So it's a lot of free-form functionality you can get out of this. If I want to be positive, I can just do the opposite and then just embed it in. And this will now make it there. Now I want this to be embedded so that my bevel is out. So just if I wanted to mold this. Now you'll see I have this whole area on the back here I don't need anymore. So what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to do that same process of masking and then pulling it in. So I'm going to mask this and then invert it. So now I just have this back area unmasked, and now I can move that into my surface. So now I have ZBrush and nothing's coming out of the back. Now if I want this all together, I can now use the Live Boolean system on this. This will now process. And then up at the top here, I now have this, and that thing is welded in, and this can now be 3D printed. So that's the other option for, say, doing text and doing it positively. And both of these end up using the Boolean system. So after you have that ZBrush kind of embedded, you're making sure that it's not coming out of the back. The Boolean system is going to go through and it's going to solidify it. So it's going to go through and weld those parts together. You could also use Dynamesh, but the Boolean system is going to be a little bit cleaner. But then now you have this as all one single piece. So if you came through and started to smooth this out, you see it's going to all go together. So it's not two separate meshes anymore. And that's just because I processed it with the Boolean. Let's see what else we got here. Sculptris Pro will not ignore, so digital planning design saying the Sculptris Pro ignore backface masking. It cannot be used with backface masking. So you want to make sure that you have to do it manually because Sculptris Pro is analyzing the entire mesh. So it's looking at everything to add stuff, and so the backface masking will not work with it. So you need to mask out part of your mesh and then use it. Kat's also bringing up that if you import an alpha and apply it, it will raise the surface and you won't get undercuts. That is correct. So you can use any alphas over here, and these are going to come in as 2D, and so when you apply them, it's not going to have undercuts. If you use a VDM map, that will generate undercuts, but traditional alphas will allow you to do anything like that. That's often used for, say, coins and collectibles, anything that has kind of an embossed look. And Rue's also bringing up, you can also use ZapLink as well, which will do a similar process. So in the font option here, you can load a font from disk. There's also a gigantic list of whatever fonts you have on your machine. You can scroll through here and select them. So there's plenty of options for fonts there. You can also load in SVG files. So if you have a specific kind of logo or icon, you can definitely load those in. If you want the word arched, so let me go back here. Let's see if I can get back to my original ZBrush here. How I do that is I'd have my mesh and then my text, and as I brought it out, I then activate Move, Scale, or Rotate, go into the gear icon on the Gizmo 3D and locate the Bend Arc Deformer. And then in here, I'd be able to bend that text there. Now the process of bending is all going to be dependent on how much topology you have on your mesh. So this one had enough since I increased that resolution there. But if you start getting weird kind of distortions on your letters, definitely you may want to Dynamesh your letters first before applying the bend. But that is how I'd say I'd perform the bend kind of words there. So I have a question about explaining texturizing a face of an object. So if you're looking for something, say like just surface texture, I could take this mesh here and I can apply some noise to it. And then I can adjust the noise scale here. And so now I've just added some noise to that. Now if you want to protect certain areas on your model, you can use masking. So if I don't want the letters to have that noise on them, you'll see that it's now protected. If I want to invert it, you can see this has the noise and the back doesn't. There's also a whole bunch of noises in Lightbox you can open up here, and you can apply these different noises to your mesh. And so let's see what this one looks like. And so now I can get something like that on my model. You can also edit these noises, so I don't really want the coloring, so I'm going to turn that off and make sure I fix this back to white here. And I can adjust the strength and the scale of this. And so that is one way you can add noise to a surface. And then masking will protect areas so the noise won't be applied. And then after you have this, you want to make sure your mesh has enough topology and you can apply it to mesh, because right now it's in a preview. So if you turn this on and off, you're going to see this is what the mesh really is. And so you want to make sure you apply it. This will apply that noise to there. Now you'll see that your resolution is going to determine how clear that noise comes in. So this mesh was still not high enough resolution to accept the noise. So it accepted what it could, but basically if I wanted something this dense, I need to divide that model up and then apply the noise to get that surface quality. Marty's asking, is the way to set backface mask off on all your brushes and masking as the default setting. So backface mask will be off by default. There is no way, however, to go through and globally set backface masking on for everything. You would have to go on a per brush basis, and then you could save those brushes out or resave the brushes, and it would remember the masking. You could probably set up a macro to do it really quick where it would scrub through your brushes and then turn the backface masking on and off. Can I project letters on the mug using the plugin? Yes, Tagarity. So for that, what I'd end up doing is I'd take my ZBrush, and instead of doing a bend backwards, let's copy this tool. Let's go back to my mug. So we're almost out the time here, but we'll do this one quick. We'll paste my ZBrush back in. So I got my mug, and I'm gonna append over my little ZBrush text. So I just added it to my mug scene here. And we'll move this out. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Embed it a little bit into the surface there. And I'm now going to go into the Gizmo 3D and use that bend arc again. This time I'm going to bend it based on this angle. So I'm just bending it along the surface like that. And then now if I turn on subtractive, see, it's going to give me that result. So you just would need to play with the bend angle, and then you can just use the Boolean system to subtract that out. In addition to this, you can also, there's a brush called Matchmaker, which will take a model and also match it to the surface. So you can take a model in front of something and then match it to the surface. However, with text like this, you probably want the text to bend around it rather than project into it. So just one little thing there, using the bend arc deformer would probably be your best bet for that. For putting a texture in a specific area, you can just use masking to mask an area and then use that kind of textured surface. If you're asking for more painting stuff, you can apply textures using drag rectangle and painting brushes pretty easily. There's a lot of ways you can add textures to surfaces. Digital Plankton's asking, when setting for 3D print, what's the best way to make it watertight? So using the, I think close holes is going to be your simplest one. So tool, geometry, modify topology, close holes. That should go through and close the stuff. If that doesn't work, you can then use Dynamesh and re-Dynamesh the model. That'll end up fixing a lot of issues because it's going to apply a close hole algorithm and then reprocess the entire surface of your mesh. And then your third option would be to use the Boolean system. But most of the times for the Boolean system work, your mesh needs to be watertight already. You could also use ZRemesher or ZRemesher model. There's a lot of ways you can go through and kind of get a mesh to watertightness. But if you have holes or something like that, Kat also mentioned in here that you could take your mesh and then apply an extraction to it, which would generate a geometry from all the surfaces. And so you can sometimes use that, extract your entire mesh out, and then that would give you anything that's thin, it's all going to be thick. And so then hopefully those thick parts would interpenetrate something else. And so then you could potentially apply Dynamesh and it would solve Swiss cheese and things like that. Alex is asking, would you need to decimate your mesh before exporting for 3D printing? Depends on the printer and the software that the printer is using for the slicer. So most of the times if your mesh is 80 million polygons, there's no way you're going to be able to get that to 3D printing. So you're going to want to take that and decimate it down before you send it to print. Also, printing in multiple pieces is another way to kind of do that. I usually end up sending stuff around 1 million to 250K is my usually go-to for 3D printing mesh sizes in terms of polygon count. And it just varies, depends what your machine is and what kind of slicer application you have. Well, I'm glad you guys appreciated this. How to print sharp edges. So web etching, it just depends on your printer. So questions asking how to print sharp edges in 3D print models. So your best, if you're using an FDM, think about how the printer is handling the print. So in terms of FDM, it's basically, think about it as a hot glue gun, right? And so it's feeding the filament down and it's heating it up and it's printing like this, right? So your best resolution on an FDM printer is going to be in this axis, right? So it's your layered axis. If you try to put a detail and you're doing it this way or this way, you're not going to get as much resolution because the resolution on that side is going to be related to the thickness of the filament, right? So that's going to give you your resolution X and Y, and your Z resolution is going to be the one, your height is going to be the one that's going to give you the most fidelity. So if you have a face and you're trying to print the face, make sure the face is going vertical. You don't want to print the face flat because when it does this on a flat thing, you're going to get a weird nose, you're going to get some weird eyes. But if you print this way, remember it's doing it like this and it's moving up, your face should have better clarity and better results. For sharp edges, it's still moving on that X and Y plane, right? So if you want a really sharp edge, you want to try to get that line to fall in that axis, and that's going to give you a better result. If your edge is like this, you're going to get this kind of like stair-stepping type stuff. So it's not going to be as straight, because just remember how the printer is printing. So if you want it a nice sharp edge, move your model so it's going like that in one of those X and Y axes. Yeah, vertical printing, print everything you want detailed vertically. Vertically is going to be give you the most quality, not horizontally. So people that, if you do say signs, like say for this, if I get back to my normal ZBrush here, and sometimes you can't do this depending on what the model is. Sometimes you won't be able to, you're going to have to, do it somewhere else. So for this, if I wanted to print these ZBrush letters here and have the most quality out of the ZBrush letters, I'd print them like this, right, vertically. However, that's going to take longer, and you're also going to have supports because a lot of these things are unsupported. Now, if you print it like this is going to be a whole lot faster because everything's supported, right? Everything's supported on this. It's going to print super fast. However, all these little areas in here, let me see if I can just do this quick, is going to end up looking like this. Let's see if I can get it to, oh, where's my drawings? Where's my drawings? My brush size. It's going to be doing this, right? So it's coming around and it's making these things. Because this is how a 3D printer is going to print this, right? So this is going to be how you're going to get these printed out. It's going to be a lot quicker. You're not going to have any supports, but this is what your end result is going to kind of look like, right? That's what it's going to look like. If you printed it vertically, I'm just going to get my rotation here. Failing on the rotation. We will get you there. This is where that stuff's going to happen. So it's not going to be on your letters. Your letters are going to have just the layer line. So that's one thing there. And as Bruce pointed out, using a smaller nozzle will definitely give you better Z details. All right. Well, thank you all for showing up and watching me sculpt a horrible mug. But the main thing is, like, you can definitely get stuff out in the ZBrush for 3D printing, and there is simple solutions that are already built in the ZBrush. So if you download the trial, grab one of these projects, sculpt on it, and then you can send it directly for printing. The other option is some of our users mentioned in the chat here is you can import something in too, and it's going to retain that scale. So if you model something quickly, say in Fusion 360, export it as an OBJ, import into ZBrush, you can now sculpt on it, and it's going to retain that scale. So that's another method to kind of, make something, say in a CAD solution, bring it into ZBrush, sculpt on it, and then export it out. It's going to retain that detailing. So another thing there just to get into 3D printing. And the 3D printing aspect, if you don't own your printer, there are numerous ways you can print. There's a lot of online services, Shapeways, Sculptio, if they're still around too, will allow you to send a model for 3D printing. They have tools online where you just upload the file, it'll analyze the print and tell you if it's going to fail or succeed through their website before you even have to press the button and send it. Also, there's some maker spaces and communities. I don't know how many are open currently right now, but you can often find people that will, have their machine set up to handle external print services, and they will just usually end up charging you for materials, and you get stuff printed out that way too. But definitely, there's multiple ways to get into 3D printing and try it out. And once you get like your first kind of ZBrush sculpt out in 3D printing form, it's pretty cool. So I highly recommend trying it out. Because once you get a little hint of that kind of feel for it, you're gonna end up printing a whole bunch of stuff. And then you're gonna go to wearables, and wearables is a whole nother level too. So you're gonna end up with like so many helmets just 3D printed laying around. You can only wear one at a time. Why do you need 6? I don't know, just need 6. All right, so once again, thank you guys and gals for showing up, and also thanks for you all in the stream for answering some of these questions, since there were a ton today, so I appreciate the support and the help there. If you know anyone that's looking to try ZBrush, the ZBrush 2020 trial is available. You can get it free, unrestricted for 30 days. You just need to come down here, click Try ZBrush, sign up for the Pixologic account there, and then you can download the trial version. You can try it for 30 days unrestricted. We'll be doing these little developer live streams. My streams, I'll have another one on Friday. We're going to cover some nanomesh fun for making foliage, which is what I'll be doing Friday. We're going to be making some topiaries. Hopefully I get through. My topiaries will look a little better than my mugs. It just all comes down to the tangents. But I'm here to I want to make sure I answer your guys' questions overall, because this is a live stream. There's no point in me kind of doing it live if I'm not helping you all as a community. So that's one of the main things with this. I believe Solomon will be streaming tomorrow, and then I'll be back on Friday. Also, if you have not checked out some of our ZBrush Master Series, we have a bunch of artists that have been coming on and talking about how they use ZBrush and the works they create. They're very informative. You can find information on that in the ZBrush Live area in Pixologic. So if you just do pixologic.com ZBrush Live, or just zbrushlive.com. Also on the ZBrush Live, we have a calendar now that will show you the events and stuff that's coming up. So you can see Vichar went on Tuesday here, and so you can actually watch his replay on that as well. So if you want to catch that ZBrush Masters, you can definitely tune into that. And just coming in here, you can see what's coming up and what's going on. And so for the month of May, there should be the streams listed here as well. So you can come through and see what is coming up. And then all these are, as long as there's no technical difficulties, will be able to be restreamed, and that's restreamed through YouTube, so you can always come back and watch those as well. So I think that is it. So thank you all, and stay safe, and stay tuned for the next stream. Cheers.